Hey, Tasha, you're muted.
Whoops, thank you.
I'm not gonna say.
I must have done that accidentally. Sorry. All right. So everybody hear me? All right. So here we go. So we are here for the seminar or the webinar on boat communications, specifically SSBs. Joan Conover, who's the president of Seven Seas Cruising Association, currently is a guru on SSBs and has helped hundreds of salty dogs get their rigs going prior to going offshore. So we're lucky to have her helping out. So this is primarily targeted at rally participants today. We've invited members to be a part of it, but if for questions, if we're running late on time, we'd appreciate if rally participants got priority. All right, Joan, anytime you're ready.
Well, thank you very much, Tasha. We've been friends for a long time, done a lot of rallies together, done a lot of single sideband discussions together. So thank you very much for an opportunity to talk. Can everybody see my screen? I don't hear any comments.
Are you referring to the one that shows the PowerPoint?
Yes,
We
I'm
can see it.
showing a PowerPoint slides, and I see chats up. Tasha, can you handle chats? Yeah, I can see yes, yes, so they can see the screen. Very good. Just wanted to be sure about that. Got another person coming in. Again, I am Joan Conover. We sail a Morgan 51 Out Island, Royal Tiger. We've done transatlantics on her. We've gone many times down the islands, gun cold around, and we have found out that the most reliable way to communicate, at least for in my way of thinking, is single sideband. I am not going to talk over Starlink RV, although we're working with that. And I'm not talking over cell phone coverage, although right now I would say if you expect cell phone coverage when you're down in the islands after a hurricane, it's not going to work. So I'm glad that you're here for the single sideband presentation, offshore and nearshore. Disclaimer is provided as informal guidance. It's advisory only. Any all communications, your ship's operations and navigation decisions are the responsibility of the ship's captain. Going offshore is complicated. And the following slides are developed from personal experience with thousands of miles. I'm a ham radio operator general. I didn't do the extra. And I've worked with almost every, and climbed through so many boats for the Salty Dogs and other boats leaving Hampton going south. I probably can describe the internal functionings of most people's bilges. Now, thoughts to start with. You don't have a 15-year-old cell phone. So I would suggest if you have a rig that you go out that white cable that runs up to the antenna somewhere and then back to your tuner. It's called a GTO 15. Just replace it. I mean, if it's 15 years old, and I've seen it on boats, that those cables degrade, they're out in the sun, they get water. Just replace it. It's not that hard. It goes from the tuner up to your antenna. And we've got some more people. Dragonfly from 2019 thanked me. And I really like the conversations they had. Thanks again for getting us going. What it is you've got one to many or many to one. It's conference calling, and it makes people feel that they're part of the community and they're connected. And that's very important offshore. Now, topics. I'm going to talk over your radio, your single sideband rig. I'm keeping it simplified. Other topics that I don't cover, but the operation should be known for your boat, like your search and rescue, your SARSAT, your EPIRB, PLBs, You need to know about your AIS. You need to know about your radio, your DSC, your VHF, your satellite locators, and how you're going to do things offshore. Radio, satellite phone, your GDMS system. That happens to be the government system. It's called GDMSF. But this is just about single sideband. Single sideband or high frequency radio. Most of your rigs will do both of them. You just have to know how to set them up. If you don't have a general ham license, you should not be on some frequencies, but the single sideband radio is able to transmit on all of them, usually. Now, your resources, and I want you to write down this email address, this URL, docksideradio.com. On his website, you will find free manuals, written instruction, radios, and parts. He's the one-stop shop for any of the SSB or radios that you're going to be using. I also want you to think about going, how you would get information offshore. And there's things like radio faxes, which transmit the sound from NOAA, and it makes a picture. And you can use, they have both voice channels and fax channels. And when I come on your rig, or on your boat to test your rig using Zoom, which I will hope to do with many of you, we'll use those signals to tell how well you're able to receive or send messages. I also want to make you aware of a NOAA's program called FTP Mail. It will send you request in an email to get a certain image from NOAA. The things that you see radio fax on their website, you can actually request that and it will come in email to you. Don't take a lot of them, but you ought to realize that you can send a request FTP mail. And what I do is I set up in my regular email at home. Before I leave from offshore, I'll push a button, I'll send that request, I'll collect everything up. And the minute I leave, I have all the NOAA pictures stored on my laptop before I leave shore. That's a very smart way to use it. What they call WeFax or WeatherFax. There are software apps that collect data from your radio speaker, or if you have a Pactor modem. There's several applications out there, but something you need to practice ahead of time. I use JVCom 32 and Airmail. There's many of those, and there's also, a lot of other applications. Predict Winds can send information through SSBs. Offshore SSB and email, you have SailMail, which is a commercial product. I think it's about $300 a year. They have the frequency set up from stations, and you just dial a station and download your email. Or if you're a ham, which means you have a general license, you can use WindLink for email. You have to have the ham license, but then your email is free. So there are the addresses, sailmail.com or www.windlink.org. Now, also the things that you need to know, and I did send that out, I sent the frequencies out. There are local nets. Usually you can reach East Coast or Caribbean, and in some cases you can reach further, but it depends on the frequency and the range. SSCA has something called KPK radio, or an 8104 upper sideband at 8:15 a.m. every morning. We can do radio checks with those, or if you're sailing offshore, there are relays, so you can talk to somebody on that frequency at 8:15 in the morning. I would suggest you get familiar with that or some of the other nets, so in case you do need to get a hold of somebody, you've already practiced doing that. Most of us have our rigs and we take them away and put them away during the summer when we're not sailing, or maybe it's a year or two. We get back and we can't remember the frequencies or who we talk to, which is why I put these up. East Coast, there's Cruisheimer's net at 8152 upper sideband. That's single sideband at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. There's a Doodah net in the afternoon. When you get on with them, they'll all ask for boat information on first contact. And also, if you make arrangements to check in, no matter what you're checking in with, do it on time, because many of us, if we're expecting someone to check in with us and they don't, we get nervous. And we can think of terrible things that have happened to you that have not really happened. Now we have a chat here. Can you set full screen? Let me see if I can do that. Well, I'm doing, I don't know. Hey, Tasha,
Yeah, Joan, if you just hit the, see where it says slideshow
yeah,
in your menu at the kind of, there you go. I think that would do it. And you might have to scroll through
start
your
from the
slides
beginning.
now.
Okay. So here I went over the topics and the resources. Can you see the whole screen?
It's perfect. Thank you, Joan.
Okay. Again, you've got local nets. Check the frequency list I sent out if you're on those lists, but sometimes you don't know what they are. Also at 2200, Chris Parker on his 8137 frequency is on that list. He does do a transatlantic net that you can also listen to, or in the morning you can listen. It doesn't cost anything. If you subscribe to his services, or if he's helping the rally, you can talk to him then, but at least you can listen and get the weather. Okay, registration. All of your devices must be registered with something called an MMSI number, which I think most of you are familiar with. Do not use the BOTUS.
Joan, the bottom of that one is cut off.
What do I have to do for this? Let me go back one. I don't know. If you give me a second, folks, let me see if I can figure this out.
Maybe, can you, is it full screen on your screen?
Let me make it full screen. Let's see if that makes a difference. Got 35 coming in. Is that better?
And then it, ooh, it's on mine, it's still a little bit off on the bottom now.
Well, I'm not sure if I probably should have done this earlier, Tasha.
Yeah, maybe, how about if you keep it smaller and then we can send out the slide deck so that people can get the small details off the recording or the slide deck.
Now, does that, you know, if I did a full screen, I'm sorry I'm playing with this. It's not my usual. Just thinking of this.
Joan, somebody just reminded us that the slides were actually in the original email too, so people have
Yes.
access to
So
them.
if you can look at those slides and go along with me, that would probably be good. Can you see the all whole screen with this? Tasha?
Yes, that's, we can see the whole slide with this.
Okay, let's do it this way then. So here are I was talking of the frequencies. Remember to have your MMSI number should be the international one, and it must be in all of your devices the same one. Sometimes people forget when it's new to them boats, they miss one or two. You also have an operator's license on your boat for country of origin, and it must be renewed. If you have a new to you boat or a new boat or rental has your MMSI number in a device, make sure you have it with the correct information. If it's a new to you boat, make sure that the owner has transferred his marine number, which is the MMSI number, to you. And I'm not going to say any more about that, but it's something to think about and to be sure that you have it registered correctly, because that's really important. That's what you're going to be depending on for both your single sideband, your EPIRB, your VHF, DSC, AIS, all uses the same number. Okay, let's talk about the rig, because this is the fun stuff. You've got a rig. You've got an antenna with a backstay or a whip. A whip is that white stick that goes up. It's called a Shakespeare, and it's usually seen on multi-hulls more than you have on monohulls. You have a tuner. You'll have a radio with a microphone and speaker. And with the 802, that face panel that you see that has all the numbers and stuff on it when you turn it on, is just the face panel. The 802 itself is a black box and we'll get into that later, but it's usually stored somewhere else away from the face panel. People kind of get confused about that, but that is some radios are contained in a box all together, and some have a face panel or control panel separate from the actual radio. You also have connections and cables. Remember, I talked about something called a GTO. The 15 is shielded cable for your antenna to your tuner. That's a very important cable, and it always gets out in the sun, salt water. If it's 15 years old or if it's 10 years old, cough up $50 and replace it. You can actually order it online at Amazon, but get it and set it up. And I'll show you how it should be connected on a backstay in some other slides. You have a connection from the tuner to the radio. There's a coax cable for that. And you also have a connection from your tuner to the next item, which is a ground or counterpoise. That's copper. That is a ground. It is not ship's ground. This is a special ground for your tuner, for your radio. And there's a lot of confusion on that. And I'll show you that in the next pictures as well. Most of the problems, I would say 85% of the problems that we find with single sideband is simply due to the ground not being connected right or being degraded. And once we fix that, and people know how to use the instructions on and operate their rigs, they are able to talk to other people, and it's just like it's crystal clear and they're happy. Now let's talk about the pieces and parts. And you may have your slides. This is kind of a small diagram. You're going to have several parts. If you look at the left side, you'll see where it says GTO 15, and there's a cable that goes up the backstay. You're going to have insulators on either side, and this GTO 15, this white cable that brings the sound from your rig, will be attached to that. It should be attached as a J shape. Clear off some of the wires at the end, make sure they're nice and clean. Always redo it every year, take a look at it. Take it, make sure you have clean wire, make it a J shape so the water doesn't end up in the metal and plastic for the covering for the cable. Just turn it upside down so it drains. Wrap it and clamp it tightly to that backstay. You have a question? No. Fasten it to your backstay with clamps. They have clamps for it, or you can clamp it however you can. Make it sure metal to metal, and then you can put some electric tape around that or anything to protect it from the weather. You can have standoffs, which are little plastic blocks that take your cable and hold it away from your backstay or something. I don't use them because that GTO is pretty well insulated, but if you want to, you can put standoffs down. Your antenna cable, that white cable, is going to go to something called a tuner, your AT140, or whatever you have. Usually we'll have that. And I'm going to now go a little bit to the southern part or the lower part of the boat where it talks about 2-inch copper metal. That is considered the counterpoise or the ground. You actually have a copper plate. You may have a copper plate. You may have strips of copper. You're going to go take a very good look at those and see what kind of shape they're in. Because if they are in bad shape, green, grody, broken, or it doesn't run to the block that maybe you have on the outside of your boat, you kind of need to get in there and look at the pieces and parts that you have on your new to you boat. And even if it's an old to you boat, you need to check particularly that ground. Now, there's also a cable that will run from the tuner back to your radio. And then your radio, if you have a pod, it will have something that goes to the faceplate. Your radio is also attached to your ship's batteries. And there's an important thing about that. This diagram came from ICOM, and it's not exactly correct. Your radio should not be attached to your counterpoise ground the same as the tuner. And if you have questions on that, please email me or contact. You should have my contact information or ask Tasha. But a lot of times I'll find people with an 802 radio that have two grounds. They go, ship's battery is a ground. And then they also go to the tuner's ground and they end up with a loop and they have terrible signals and they can't figure out why. Now, also in this diagram, you'll see where it has at the bow of the boat, twin lead radials. That is also considered a ground plate for your counterpoise, your ground. You can have, people have done all kinds of things to increase their signal. Steel boats will just have the ground go directly to their steel boat with an isolator, but they will still have the ground go to their boat. And that brings up something else, isolating. I want you to go and make sure that you have chokes or those little funny things that go, those little black metal things that you get from the radio store or whatever, on all of your electronics on your boat. Electronics coming turned on in a boat can turn things off and on in your radio. You need to put chokes or protect your equipment from itself, from the radio, but also from each other, and make sure you don't have interference. So what we've gone over in this, you have an antenna, and I will briefly mention a Shakespeare, which is at the usually on a stern or side of your boat. It's a white stick that goes up, and your GTO cable will go into the bottom of that antenna, and then it will go to the tuner. And that connection at the bottom of the antennas always gets wet, so they always have trouble there. And a lot of times with a Shakespeare, they're very sensitive to noise. So you should not put it next to something too close to something that's going to be giving off a lot of noise. That can be your engine. That can be, you can have a radio antenna. Just keep it away, about a foot away from any other antennas, at least. So we've gone over antennas, a backstay, roughly a little bit on a Shakespeare. Going down to the tuner. Then we're going to the radio, which says an M802 in the middle of the boat. It's attached to your ship's batteries where it gets its ground. And batteries are important on these radios. If you have a weak battery, you're going to have a weak radio signal. So be sure you have good, strong batteries, that they're topped off. And I recommend not running the charger at the same time you do your radio, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Your tuner has a ground, which is that copper or twin radials, or it could be your ship's hull if you're steel. And that's the basic part of it. You're going to have a speaker, microphone on your radio. You're going to learn how to tune your radio to the different frequencies, and you're going to learn how to listen to see if your tuner is actually working. I'm going to go to the next slide. Now I'm going through here a little bit rapidly here, so let me, slides are in the original mailings, and there's my email address. Okay. So we have the rig components. We've gone over sailboat, kind of the pieces and parts. Now, let me see if I can view this a little bit differently. Of all things, I don't need that. I don't need widgets. I do not know what this is, so bear with me. This is a new box, and I have no idea. I don't need widgets again. This is really funny. I hate this. Stupid. There we go. Now, single sideband hardware. Again, we talked the radio, and we talked the next below it says ICOM. That's a tuner. You're going to find that tuner in a box or a locker on the back of your boat. Usually, the radio is usually in the center, and that's the faceplate right there for an 802. And then you may have a backdoor modem. You're going to have your radio. You'll have your antenna tuner. You'll have coax table. You have a GTO 15. That's a feed line. You'll have cable guards, standoff insulators. You may have a backstay insulator. You're going to have heavy gauge wiring. You're going to have ground straps or ground plate, this copper stuff. You may have an alternate antenna and alternate grounds, and you may have a Pactor modem. I would suggest you sit down and draw a diagram so you know where all your pieces are if you aren't familiar with them. And when you have something that you don't know what it is before you disconnect it, be careful and take pictures of the back of it, take diagrams so you can always put it back together the way it was. The other thing I'm going to bring up right now with all these cables and everything running around in your boat, I have seen some of the most beautiful cable jobs ever done. And they've been beautifully tied up with all those, the ties and neatened up and fastened against the hull. If you have a power cord for anything, you don't put it with your cable up with any of the cables that go for the radio. The worst noise in the world is a power cable for something else, very carefully tied up nice and tight with your cables for your radio, especially that coax that goes from the tuner to the radio. It can introduce so much sound and people just aren't aware of it. And you'll just hear this terrible vacuum cleaner sound on your radio and you don't know it's because it's so neatly packaged. Neat isn't best with radios sometimes. And do we have questions on this? This is really just generic, starting to get familiar with things and the words. Connections and cables. Most of you probably have rigs that work of some sort. Maybe there's some sound on it. Maybe you can't hear anything, but you hear sound. You may need familiarization with the operations on your rig. You definitely need to know what frequency to have on your box, and you can have two of them. You can have a send and receive that can be different, or you can have a receive and send that are all the same. And if someone has set your radio up and has changed one frequency to be something else, you can think you're transmitting on the right one. So I want you to take your radio, get the manual, and look at the frequencies instead of the name. We have an address book on our radios, and we have the numbers that are the frequencies on our radio, and you can go back and forth and look at them. So again, talking about being neat, people will have the text up there, but you really need to be sure if you're not getting through that you're transmitting on the right frequency and you're receiving on the right frequency. Normally for single sideband, for everything we do, it's the same for both. But there's some settings and some frequencies that are automatically set on your box that have two different frequencies. And we don't mess with that. We're going to mess with just a very small block of addresses on our radios. Again, areas of most problem, the antenna connection. Expose the environment. You need to make sure it's clear, it's clean wire. You haven't put grease, glue, or anything on the backstay and then put the wire to it, and do not spray any sort of goop onto any of your electrical connections for your radio. One of the worst things that we had to clean up once was someone who had sprayed some sort of oil or something for protection on all of the connections and cables and the bare wires for his backstay, and nothing worked. We had to take and scrub it with degreaser and everything else with a toothbrush, and it never really worked right afterwards. You need to every year check and reconnect your cables annually, look for rust, for water that's gotten in, so that all those lines that connect from point A to point B are clean. You need to, again, check that antenna backstay, make sure it's clean, stainless to stainless. Again, don't use grease, electric tape, or sprays. One of the other issues was someone took electric tape, very carefully wrapped the backstay and then put the wire to the electric tape and then taped it up. And it took a long time to figure out what had happened there. We took off the electric tape and put wire to wire, and it worked just fine. Counterpoise, we talked about that. You may have or see, and you need to go look at it, copper foil to a dynaplate. A dynaplate is a chunk of copper that's on the outside of your hull. There is a screw that goes through inside your hull, and you have a a copper attachment to that that goes to your tuner. Or if you don't have a Dynaplate, which is a very good device, you may see this kind of a strapping or copper laid down in the hull. If you have your copper is fiberglassed into the hull, that's can be an issue because you don't see it and it can degrade and you don't know why. Again, don't confuse ship's ground, that bolt on your engine block, as the same as the ground or counterpoise for your radio. They're very different. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about ground loops. It's one of the major causes of radio problems. You can introduce a loop where the signal just kind of keeps going back and forth to each other, and either you won't be able to hear, or it's going to be very difficult for you to understand anyone. And that's why I said that you get your power and your ground from your DC power to your radio. You don't need to ground the radio to your ship's ground. Don't do that. Again, it's not recommended to ground the radio case or chassis to ship's ground, that green wire. It's already getting it via DC. So all you're doing is setting up a loop, and it's very hard to troubleshoot. And we have another person on chat. Excuse me for a second. Tom Ray is asking, I'm an SSB newbie. Is the purpose of the Pactor modem for receiving data only? Tom, yes. The Pactor modem is for you to be able to receive emails or radio faxes or to send data over your radio. And I'm not sure what you have on your boat, but if you have a Pactor radio and you have a Pactor modem and a radio, and you need help with that, I can help you with that in the software. That's why I'm going to be asking, if you want to do a 101, email me so I can reach out to you. I do have the list. I may end up emailing everybody on the list that has single sideband to see what they need. I think you did see that I asked for the kind of rig and whatnot that you have. And at the end, if we have time, I might ask you to share off with somebody, share what you have and what needs you have. Okay, one kind of copper or counterpoise, you'll hear of something called a KISS. I use one. I've got it attached to my tuner. It becomes my ground plane, and it works fine. Not everybody likes it. If you have a bonded boat, it may not work as well, but at the end of the day, if you're having trouble with your counterpoise or your ground, a KISS is a great backup to have or use. Now I'm going to talk a little bit on your antenna. As you can see here, I have a backstay. Remember where I say to put the loop? I want you to save this slide, because see how you loop it, and it talks about not letting the water go down. And here you have the, at the bottom, you can see where the KISS goes to the tuner, or that could be your other copper. It's the same thing, but it goes to the tuner. And your standoff spacers, you can have those blocks or nylon to the backstay. It just makes it maybe last longer in the tropics. I don't know. I have a white cable and it works for me. I also use a split bolt connector, and I use that to clamp the wire to my backstay. I know it sounds like I'm going on a lot of details on this, but if you do all of this right, then the talking part is much easier. And I'm going to go back to chat. See and save messages and can share them and everything. I don't know what that's about. Anyway. Okay, do I need an SSB with DSC? My 802 does not have a DSC. No, you don't. Your 802, DSC means you've got a GPS signal and you've set it up with DSC. I am sure that you have your VHF radio has DSC, and that will work. If you don't have one on your 802, I don't have one on my 710. I run with other devices to send out distress signals. So If you want to get an 803 with DSC, you can. You may want to look at how to set up DSC on your 802 because they should be able to do it. It depends on the model. And if you want to, you might want to get a hold of me after that. Now, Ed says there's a standard looking VHF antenna hooked up to my 802. That is your DSC. That VHF antenna hooked up to your 802, that's for your DSC. That is your digital selective calling. It's not an alternate antenna. And you also have a 140 tuner connected with GTO 15 to isolated wire backstage. Good. And that's Ed on Ed's iPhone. But again, you're going to find if you have an 802 and it has DSC, it's going to have a VHF antenna. And that's for VHF. It has nothing to do with single sideband antenna, but that's for you to be able to send out your emergency messages. Let me see who else we have. Okay, Tom Ray says no modem, only an 802 radio, and his data will be a Iridium Go. Excellent. I do that as well. I have so many backups. We have a new message here with a GAM antenna. No. I'm using just, oh, you're talking about the little black antenna. Herb, tell me yes or no. You're talking one that clamps on to the back of your backstay. It's a black clamps on and it's an alternative. Yeah, it's an alternative antenna. I hadn't heard it called again, but that works well. I've seen people have it work well. You just have to be sure that your grounds and everything else are right, because you can have the best stuff in the world, but if you don't have a good ground plane and that counterpoise, the other stuff doesn't work. But yeah, I've had experience with that. I like it. I like backups to things. I'd be tempted to take one as a backup. Here from Chris Payne, on my Cat, I have a regular VHF at the masthead. Good. A whip out back, which is probably, yes, probably your DSC. It's a wire whip. It's a wire whip and not the Shakespeare, the white Shakespeare. It's a tall pole. And you have what looks like a single sideband up starboard shroud. Yeah. If you have single sideband, are you in a Cat, Chris, or are you in a monohull? Catamaran. Okay. You could have trace your wires. Just remember, you can have a VHF antenna for your single sideband radio. So I'm assuming that one is probably for your DSC VHF. But I'd trace everything out because you probably don't know what you got, or take pictures of it. And then show me the pictures of what you've got when I talk to you, if we can do that. That will help. Chris, are you going to be down in Hampton? Or are you up in Newport? Well, Chris, in Hampton 1023, I should be down there by then. So I'll come out and take a look if that's okay with you. Now let me go back to slide. Okay, so that was some good discussion on antennas and what we got and what we don't know what we got, which, believe it or not, that happens even if you had your brig forever. I forget where everything is. I'm always putting something new on somewhere and then I forgot I put it on. I think that's probably happens to a lot of us. Now, I'm going to suggest something. We have a event up in Annapolis, Maryland at Pasadena on October 2nd. We have ham exams, but it means there's some ham experts there. You're going to be in the area. You might want to look and see if that SSCA ham exam or event might help you if you need to get a license updated or something. Now, what I wanted to show you, this is the hub of a 802 torn apart. And you can see the pieces and parts. Here's the black part. And he's been taking things apart. The important thing on this is there's a little tiny fuse in there. And I want you to save this one because sometimes you can have an accident in the islands and you don't know how to fix it and your radio stops working and everything. It's very likely that fuse. And it's really, I'd have to show it to you. I'm not comfortable giving instructions to do this over the air or anything else, but it is possible that you can actually get a fuse for your radio and just keep it as a backup. Because if anything goes wrong with the radio, a lot of times it's that. These are really workhorses and they just don't have problems. Here we're tearing it apart. There's the fuse. You see that little tiny fuse right there? So we're taking this box off. I put arrows on there, taking that box off and going in for the fuse. Again, don't have it plugged in. And, you know, this is just a suggestion. It isn't, I want to disclaim anybody getting their permanent curls in their hair from stuff, but that is where the fuse is in the box. And emergency, that's where you would find it. Now, let's talk about the ground issue. 802, radio chassis ground issue. The 802 has some different parts on it. You'll see that little black box has these connectors where things are. There's a rear panel, but that's your main unit. Do not go ground your 802 chassis, that black box, to that green wing nut to a ground, to ship's ground. Don't do it. That's going to introduce so much error and you will not be happy. It's not going to hurt anything if you take it off. If you have it on your box, you take it off and test your radio. If you have an improvement, I think you'll be surprised. But it's a known issue. You do not ground the 802 chassis. You get the ground from the DC electric. The instructions are not correct that they have on the ICOM. And if you call ICOM up, they'll tell you that. But since they're not making 802s or, you know, anymore, that's life. Now, before you leave, again, remember I talked about bundle cables. Bundle power next to coax cables is bad. Unbundle it. Check and resecure your connectors. Obtain the best frequency list. And I used Dockside Radio. But I'm going to go through how you look at your radio and see what you have. I pre-program your Salty Dog radio and emergency frequencies, and I post a cheat sheet with those, just like it's like channel 120, channel 124, channel, you know, whatever, and schedule time of operations. I usually only use 3 or 4 frequencies or channels an entire voyage. You don't need to know all of them. You just need to know the ones you need and where they're at and the times that they have somebody answering it or talking on it. Review your radio protocols with your crew. That's why you put a cheat sheet and kind of like simple instructions. Your crew may have to use that radio. So at least walk through them, turning it on, how to tune a channel, how to turn the dials so that they can get what they need in case of emergency. You might consider a noise canceling headset, and it looks cool. And practice. But before you leave, all this should be done. And I usually try to get people to do this in the spring. Obviously, it's not spring. So, you know, but check your bundling, check your connectors, check that counterpoise. And if it looks green and grody, cough up a little bit to get some extra copper sheeting and stuff. You can get that from West Marine and just lay it down in the hull of your boat somewhere and connect it. And that should help you a lot. Now, on air, let's talk a bit about single sideband etiquette, how to identify yourself. I am sure you are familiar to listening to the VHF radio and the US Coast Guard, who blithely gives out information you can't even hear because they're talking so fast. Um, you have to speak slowly, enunciate, short sentences. And you're going to really use your voice and drive your rig with your in the speaker with your voice. You don't spit into the speaker, but you speak directly into the speaker, and you can actually drive your sound, your power on your radio and get larger, farther range if you do this correctly. Now, if I was going to speak to somebody on my boat, the first thing I would do is I'd use my boat name, not my operator's license name, because you're on an SSB, my boat name. I would say, Marine Weather Center, Marine Weather Center. This is Growl Tiger. And I'd wait for a few minutes. And then I'd try it again, and I'd wait. And then I'd try it again. And if I still haven't heard anything, then I would say, Marine Weather Center, this is Growl Tiger, clear, which means I now have left the channel and somebody else can come in. That's how you would identify. If you knew another boat and you wanted to talk to them on a channel or on a frequency at a certain time, and you'd made arrangements to be on that channel, on that frequency, and they knew the time, then they would come up on their boat and you would talk to like Wayward Wind, this is Growl Tiger. And then they'd answer, this is Wayward Wind, Growl Tiger. Over. And over would tell that I'm ready for me to speak. It's not complicated, but you do have to really think about it when you're talking, especially when you're nervous about something. It's very hard to speak on the radio the first time. You just have to practice doing it. And unfortunately for women, it's because we have soft voices. We really have to learn how to project. And remember, the world can hear. Speak slowly, clearly, short sentences. Do not use bad language. That's a no-no. Although it's tempting sometimes if you see a boat almost running over you or something, to tell them what you think, but it's very, very polite, and you're going to use short sentences and no ums and ohs. I also suggest setting up a radio log so you know who you've talked to and whatnot. And I like, for my rig, I like to press the tune button on the frequency before I start talking. My rig does not automatically tune when I turn to a frequency, and I have to tune it with my voice, which means that you don't hear the first part of my communications. So I like to hit the tune button to get it on the right frequency so the radio doesn't work. And then I'm going to be talking on it, that frequency. I see on the air, I see, okay, I have put up at the bottom of the screen some of the frequencies, and these are ones we don't change on our radio because you've got a working block of numbers from a channel. I usually go about channel 100 to channel 160 is all you can mess with those all you want. The rest of them, leave it there, because you have ship's channel in UTC, UTI channels and all that kind of stuff already set on your boat. And some of it's for emergency communications with the Coast Guard. So you need to know what that is, and it's in the manuals on the frequencies that everybody has. Coast Guard actually has someone on radio listening, and there's also big ships use certain channels, and those are the ones that are considered, don't change them, they have two frequencies. How can I tell if my SSB is working? Well, first of all, when you're looking at your screen, you're going to see little blips across the bottom when you talk. You're going to see little blips, little dashes across the bottom when someone talks to you. I call those doodahs, and there is a net called a doodah net. You want to see, at least when you're talking, those little lines across the bottom. You want it 3, 4, 5 of them. Now, if it goes all the way across and kind of vibrates, you've got too much sound. We usually don't have that problem. But you want to see, that tells you if your rig is actually working. You can see if nothing is going at the bottom of the screen, we're going to have to figure out what's going on with your rig. Radio checks. You can dial a frequency 8104 upper sideband or Cruisheimer's net and do a radio check. Now, one of the major things that I found wrong is people don't understand that we have Eastern time and Atlantic time, and time changes 1st of November when you leave. So make arrangements to figure out what time system you're going to be on, and make sure everybody knows that, because if you're an hour late getting onto a net, you're not going to hear anything. So check your time. The nets be on a different time and you may miss the broadcast. If you can't hear or there's noise on your radio, turn off your electronics one at a time. See if you can find noise interference. One of the best ways to tell if you've got RF frequency interaction with your items on your boat is if you speak loudly in your radio and it turns on the lights in your boat, you probably have some interference. And that's where those chokes, those things that go around the electric wires that kind of stop radiating interference out into the boat. One of my favorite ones was it last year? I think it was last year. Every time someone used his VHF or his single sideband radio, his bow thruster, it was a bow thruster, his bow thruster turned on. Now offshore, that's probably not a big deal, but if you're at the dock and your bow thruster turns on, that's not good. And we just found out it was the ground wires were messed up on his boat. And once he got that fixed, it solved that issue. But I have never seen a bow thruster get turned on from using a USB. I've seen on my boat, I've managed once when I was playing with something, I turned on the air conditioning unit when I was transmitting. But normally, you don't do, if you have things that turn on, guilty parties happen to be refrigeration. Autopilots can do it. You can have water pumps, bad deal. Anything that has an electric signal that is not shielded can affect your single sideband radio, or your single sideband radio can affect it. And way you troubleshoot it is you turn on electronics and try to transmit each time. And when you get done turning everything off, you'll find you have a very clear signal. I think it was a couple of years ago, someone had actually installed his radio on his always on 24-volt refrigerator freezer on his boat. And we had a difficult time. I don't know if we ever worked our way through that because he really needed to move his radio. I don't know who installed it. Now I'm going to go back to the chat here. Matt is to everyone. Let's see if we can. Bill Berner, my 802 does have a DSC button on the left side under the covered distress button. Okay, Bill. So you have DSC. Excellent. And that's where it really becomes critical that your MMSI number is the correct one in your radio, because if you're going to send out a DSC signal for help, helps with the MMSI number, that capital M, capital S, capital I number is the one for your boat. Then Ed says, when I plug headphones into the radio, the speaker is still used, but not all the time. It comes and goes. You should have on the 802, I'm assuming, Ed, you've got 802 and it says speaker. And you're going to plug into the, I think you got a connection loose. When I plug, sometimes, not all the time, it comes and goes. Ed, I want you to take a picture of you plug the headphones into and send it to me. Can you do that? And then Matt says, okay, so Bill says his MMSI is programmed in radio seeing lat long from network. Good. Sounds like you got that set up. Matt says, I'm in the process of installing a new rig, don't like backstay isolators. Connecting the backstay, you got to use isolators, okay? There's a reason you have isolators. I know, because I had a ground and I was transmitting on the radio and I had my hand on the stay. And I think I straightened my hair for the next 20 years from the power coming off of that signal. Radios transmit power. So why don't you get a GAM, try a GAM. If you don't want to use the backstay isolators, GAM is a good solution. That's the best, but you've got to have isolators. I mean, there's a reason for that. It's a safety issue. Okay, and Ed says there's a headphone jack on the radio front. So he'll send that to me. Ed, good, because I can figure out what you're doing this way. And we can zoom in and look at it too. Okay, I think I'm done with messages here. Oh, Bill says I have to check for VHF antenna. Okay. Should the radio be left on? Here's a good one. Should the radio be left on all day and night? No. That radio is a energy hog. So if you leave it on, you're drawing energy. I only turn it on when I want to use it, and I turn it off. VHF, I leave on. I leave the VHF on. My SSB radio, I turn it on when I want to use it, and I turn it off. Now, my usual schedule, okay, if I'm offshore and I'm heading to Antigua, I get up at 4 in the morning, I do my coffee, because I start getting good signals in the morning for radio, fax, and email. I'll usually download my email. It can take a long time. We're not talking speed on a single sideband. 1200 baud, remember that from years ago? Well, that's the speed we're talking about. So it's got to be short and sweet, and I normally expect to have a email vendor of some sort, or I use my WinLink, which nobody knows the address to. I don't give my address to that email out. I don't get spam on it. So all I'm doing is getting short text messages where I send a message to somebody that I need something, or I get my weather from it. Offshore, I don't want to be connected with the world. So I get to 4 o'clock, I'm downloading my radio stuff, email, and then I start listening about 6 o'clock to Chris Parker. That's where he does the Eastern Caribbean, and I'll just listen. If I've done things right with my email, I have pulled down the weather information I need. I've kind of looked over things really quickly. I know what questions I want to ask Chris. And if I need to, I'll ask him that. But usually I just kind of chart out. I get those hurricane maps from all the stores. They have hurricane maps to track that. I use that to track my weather. And I'll draw in the fronts and stuff and have that before I leave. And then I kind of mark what Chris says. And I know when I look at stuff every day, I update a sheet and get my information from Chris. And then I usually turn around and we'll go on the net and talk with the other boats, either if I'm in range for the KPK radio, I'll check in with them. I will check in with Cruiseheimers if that's the time, or I'll check in with the net and talk with the, if I'm with a rally or whoever I'm supposed to be talking with. And then I turn the radio off because it does take a lot of power when you transmit. Okay, Nick on COA. Should the ground wire be attached to the tuner? Yes. So is that connection the same lug as a counterpoise connection for tuner? No, no, no. The counterpoise is the ground. So look at the picture of the tuner, and you're going to have your ground is the copper. The tuner is actually getting ship's ground through the battery, through the radio or the electric connection to give it power. So it's getting ship's ground that way. There are some setups with the 802 where a ground wire is connected to the tuner. That's really rig specific. If you have a question about that, if it came with it and was integrated into the coax cable that comes from the radio with a green connection, and that's on the tuner, I would leave that. but just a separate ground wire from somewhere that you found, don't connect that to tuner. Only use the counterpoise connection to the tuner. And again, that ground wire, I believe that's correct. I think I would like to ask Gary at Dockside Radio. I'd take a picture of it and send it to Gary because he maybe knows that rig, that configuration setting of it better. But if you can't do that, send it to me. I'll send it off to Scott Berg, who's a ham expert, and see if that's the correct connection. I may have a picture of it somewhere too. But Nick, I hope that answers that question. Photo, there's a headphone in the front. Nick says perfect. Well, thank you, Nick. I try, you know, there's a lot of pieces on a radio. But again, those doodads, when I'm looking at a boat, either Zoom or on the boat and looking through what's been done, I like to see those doodads, and I usually have, I can set somebody up to help do testing, or you can test with each other. You have to realize that when you're testing in the same harbor, you can tell if everything's working, but you won't be able to tell if you have range. You need to talk to someone in Florida, and we'll talk about that in a minute, at the right time, because it's not only it's power, it's your rig setup, but also it's kind of like this solar stuff. You got to have the right propagation to get to certain places. And propagation means just, can you send or not? And if it's a good time for you to send to a certain place, there's some information I can give you to help you with that. Problems underway. Okay, you started your engine up and you're heading out and your radio really sounds bad. Well, you've got a lot of pumps going and stuff like that. Sometimes I like to, especially if it's a really critical time, I like it when I'm just sailing and I don't have the engine on, or the battery charger is a bad thing to run with you when you're trying to work on the radio, or the water maker or anything like that. You really want to be sure that you have as less RFI interference as possible. If you have interference, turn off something and see if it clears up. The other problem, getting the schedule wrong, no one's there. The third one's propagation, which I mentioned. The fourth one is battery strength. You want to have a good battery because this stuff pulls battery. I've never really seen a bad SSB radio. The fuse can go, but the cables, the ground, and the tuner, that's where the problems end up. I've seldom seen the coax between the radio and the tuner be a problem, but I've seen the counterpoise, that ground copper, and the antenna. Those are the two places that you usually find problems. Now let's talk propagation. And I'm going to pull this up a bit. Propagation. Propagation is interference. It's based on time of day and solar activities, okay? And you may have to change the frequencies you're going to use for a day because nobody can hear anything. So you always want to have a backup frequency to use in case one frequency doesn't work. Now, at the bottom of the screen, what you'll see is something that has squares of green and red. And what I'm running right there is something called SailMail. And it has an app on it that will show you propagation for different places. So I'll say, oh, I'm going to look at, for example, Rock Hill, North Carolina as my location. I'll select that, and then I'll select, put a lat long in for myself, and it will tell me at a certain time of the day, green or red, what I can expect, if it'll work or not. So one of the main things, if I can't hear anything, I will check the propagations. Very important for email, because if you're doing that, and that's a different topic, but propagation is something you need to be aware of, and you may need to change frequencies to a different frequency just because of solar storms or solar activity or time of day. And there's some apps out there that we can help with, but also I just download some of these things and just have them. I don't really use them, but I have them. I put the information in, and I'm able to see what works good. After a bit, you kind of know, but at the very beginning, those are kind of the things you have to look at. You have the same thing with the iridium. Sometimes it'll be really good and sometimes it won't be. It's not the same as a radio, but you do need to have clear sight in the sky, and you need to be near a satellite transmitting for sometimes for iridium. Sometimes it can be not as good as you'd like. Now, global positioning system, GPS. I wanted to mention that because it's used on your radios, your 802s, your 803s, your Spot, your Garmin InReach, your Zoleo, and some satellite phones. If it's a shared resource, sometimes you'll have a GPS and it's shared by, you've got a little box on that sharing box on the antenna, so other devices can use it. If it's a shared resource, just verify that each of them works together and it doesn't stamp on each other. See the manual for testing features, especially, and I'm talking mainly DSC on this. See the manual for testing. And if you tell your people you're going to be sending a location message on a schedule, do it again. People will jump through hoops to find you. It's going to be the Salty Dog Rally folks that are looking for check-ins, or it could be radio people looking for check-ins. And then again, check your propagation and footprint. What can you see for all devices? So I've kind of gone through this kind of roughly, I'm going to stop the share here. And I see everybody there. I'm hoping this has been kind of a help. It is basically the start or the beginning of how to use your radio. Tasha, people can ask questions if they do one at a time.
Yep.
And I'm perfectly willing to take questions from spoken questions from the audience if they would like that. Radio footprint. You can reach, and this is Peter Sorlin to everyone. By footprint, I mean how far you can reach with your radio at any point in time. You're actually with a single sideband radio. If you think about it, the Earth is round, right? And you're bouncing your radio waves up on the upper atmosphere and making it come down to a different point. So you have to know what your propagation is and how far you can reach it. Footprint is really important when you're talking, anytime you're using satellites for stuff. And I use both. I have satellite phones, and I've got your GPS is a satellite system, uses probably Iridium on it for InReach. Yeah, it is InReach, uses Iridium. Or Zoleo uses Iridium. Spot has its own, it uses Globalstar. But the footprint, it basically how far you can reach. And it depends on time of day, and it depends on strength of your signal, and it depends on your atmospherics. And sometimes when you have clouds, you get really good coverage. That's just funny, but that's true. I've got a chat question here.
Joan?
Yeah, Paul. Yes, Paul.
Good afternoon. What is your experience using Predict Wind with your SSB?
Very good, but remember you're using as email. So you have to have a way to get your Predict Wind email or data through your single sideband. Now, do you have a way to get email on your radio?
Yes, we have a Pactor 3 modem, and we currently subscribe to SailMail.
Oh, good. So you are probably familiar with that propagation tool on SailMail, aren't you?
Yes, we have better luck actually from the Chesapeake communicating through Lunenburg, Nova Scotia.
Yep. Or yeah. Sometimes a station can get overwhelmed, but right now with all these big storms and stuff that are going through, it's causing some disruption. And now, when are you going to be down here, Paul, or are you down here already?
No, we expect to be at Blue Water by October 25th, and would certainly like to engage with you to inspect the rig on our boat.
Okay. I will, as much as possible, help with that. I would suggest you send an email to Predict Wind. I know Nick Olson, but he's they have a tech team. Send an email, tell them you're going to be using, Sail Mail to connect to get the Predict Wind data. And basically, you're just going to be sending a signal out to get the data, and it'll, but they will walk you through. They're really good at it. Now, do you also have an inReach? Do you have a backup unit?
Yes, we have access to inReach.
Okay, it is possible that you can use the inReach to get your Predict Wind data too, because he has a way of doing that through text. But I like the email part of it. So, but I would set that up with them right away, because you want to play with that now. Not waiting. You need to be able to be using all that stuff. Also, Sail Mail has excellent weather download capabilities if you look at the catalogs. I do recommend, and they will send grid files too. I do recommend, though, that you don't set anything up on emails from anybody that sends you stuff on a schedule. Because if you don't download and clear your email buffers out, all of a sudden you have 5 years of emails to try to download to a tiny pipe, and you just can't get data. So don't give out your Sail Mail address or any email address you're going to use offshore. Keep it separate, and be sure not to subscribe to getting stuff automatically all the time. I always go and get it when I need it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And we've had experience with that before. And I do send emails to family and a few friends, but very little probing or broadcasting. We try to maintain a minimum amount of time on the radio itself. One
Right.
question regarding Predict Wind, however, is there a long, to get an update from Predict Wind, is that a fairly lengthy process, downloading it through the SSB?
Well, just think of it this way. It's going to be a data string, and ask Predict Wind what is best for you. But I'm also going to tell you something that they have just done for Predict Wind. They come out with a data hub. If you can get your hands on one of those, I'd add that to my toolkit. If you're using Predict Wind at all, get the data hub. And I've got 2 of them up in Annapolis that we're testing on, I'm thinking October 2nd, up in Maryland at the Maryland Yacht Club. The developer for Predict Wind is going to be there. So, but I don't know the size of the message. It depends on how big a box you pull for your data. But they're usually Nick has been really great about knowing how small a pipe we have and how much you get to ask for. This could be a whole nother topic of apps for offshore, I think. But the radio only downloads at a very slow rate of speed. Everything offshore, even your Iridium Go, is a download speed that's slow. So be sure you protect that email and everything else. So Paul, I want you to get a hold of Predict Wind, tell them you have a single sideband. They have the instructions, I think, on the website for you. And follow that, and be very careful what you download for everything you do for everybody. Now, John Rizzi, I have a copper ribbon counterpoise embedded in my fiberglass hull. Where it comes out and is exposed, it's rough shaped, nearly eaten through in one spot. Can I splice in new copper to replace the ugly area? John, think about it. What's it like inside the fiberglass? It may be bad. what I would suggest is go run a new line of copper and connect it to your tuner. Go get some copper foil and just make add that or add a kiss to it. Take your existing copper off and put a kiss on. That's a solution for that one. I don't know that I would. You can try to repair it. I mean, you can try it. It won't hurt. And if you have good transmission and volume, then it's working. If it isn't working, you've got to come up with. I just get a handful of copper, a roll of that copper stuff from West Marine. It's about 2 inches wide. You get it copper sheeting, and just beware that you may have to put that in place or get a kiss. Kiss isn't that expensive. They're they were about $150. So you can replace the copper. The thing is that you can't see where it's bad. So if it's bad in the hull, if there's been water in the hull for some reason or anything, or it's degraded, because it doesn't just have to be the spot. You see it. It's a connection. It's electrical. It can. It's just like you're going to put a sacrificial zinc on your engine because you don't want the whole engine to get eaten up. Copper can degrade all the way along it. Now let's see. Did that answer your question, John? Okay, John, I'll order and keep it simple. Good. I agree. Your thing may work, but if it doesn't work, try that, and you can always send them back. But to keep the frustration down, that's a good idea. Do we have any more chats? No. Okay, I see Paul and Darlene. I see Paul. I see Carl and Val. I see Peter, Paula Hefner, Matt, Mark Hill, David, Mike, Nick Hill, Herb Roth. Boy, that's a famous name. Simon Curran. I see. I can't get it to go side. Oh, it's not my, okay. The Zoom meeting, there we are. So SV San Giulio is the name of your boat? And I have another question. Cruisheimer's radio check. I didn't see a specific time on the slide. Is there one? Yes, it's 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. It's either Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time. They shift the time. Remember, time will change 1 November. So we go from daylight savings time back to standard time. And it always confuses folks. You will ask the rally for your frequencies that you used in the rally, what time they want to be on. You might want to stay on Atlantic time, which is daylight time. But it's something to talk about, and so you don't get confused. Cruisheimer's radio, you will do a radio check with them. They'll come up at 8:30 in the morning on all nets. You will hear first. They're going to ask they'll identify themselves as a radio station. For example, if I was a relay where I'm helping KPK radio, I would say, this is KPK radio on such and such a channel for safety and security. And are there any emergencies? And then anyone who has an emergency at the very beginning of a net is when you can talk. And after that, then they'll open it up for different areas. And usually the net controller who runs the main radio, they're all the same radios as yours, but he's just by protocol is the net controller. We'll open it up and say, everyone in Virginia, come now. By come now, he means talk. So I was going to be a net controller. I would say boats, offshore boats near Bermuda, come now. And then you would come in and say, KPK radio, this is Growl Tiger, or KPK radio, this is San Giulio. And then the net controller would come back and say, this is KPK, what is your message? Or KPK San Giulio. And then what is your message? And then you would tell him what you need to tell him. And when you're all done, say over, you're done. In between conversations, to tell people you're done talking, if I said San Giulio, KPK radio, over. That means you can talk. I'm done. And then at the end of every radio net, you the radio net controller will sign off for everything, saying this channel, this frequency is clear. Okay, a note from John. Okay. I talked to John yesterday and we talked about his boat, and he's got an ICOM 710 and I have an ICOM 710 too, so that will be good. I also have a 700 and a couple more. Can't just have one radio. Anyway, I think it would be very smart, since so many people have radios, once we get some radios and rigs working, that it would be a very good idea to set up a frequency just to test in amongst yourselves. And you can pretend to be a radio controller as long as no one's using a time or frequency. The way it works, if a frequency isn't scheduled and there's a whole block of frequencies that you can use, if they don't have it scheduled and no one's using it, if you get on a frequency and there's nobody there, it's perfectly legitimate for you to use it. And very frankly, if someone else comes up and they want that frequency, they'll tell you. And may not be polite, but they will tell you. So if you don't hear anything on a frequency, and you listen very carefully because you don't want to talk, if someone else is talking on a frequency, it's very impolite to key your mic to try to spit or whistle into the mic. We don't do that. If someone's using a frequency, it's theirs as long as they want to use it. Once they stop using it, you can go to another one, or you can use it, or go to another frequency. And I would have a series to use. It's not that chatty out there anymore, so you're probably going to be really helpful. And I think you guys will work all together as you're sailing, and you'll find it very useful. Does anyone else have any questions? Hello.
Yeah, Joan, I was going to just thank you for all of the time. We've gone over quite a bit already, so we should probably wrap it up here.
Okay.
I see this as sort of the beginning of the SSB conversation. I'm sure that Joan will be working directly with quite a few of you going forward, and we'll be setting up some nets, obviously in the next couple of weeks once our registration sort of, settles in. But thank you again, Joan. That was great information.
Okay, I will be up in the event, as SSEA has a seminars up in Maryland at the end of September, 1st of October. I will be at the Annapolis Boat Show, Sailboat Show. I don't think I'm coming to your dinner. I'm very sorry for that, Tatcha. But I think that Bill Cullen is coming. But I'm going to be like slammed because of once I've worked the boat show all day long, I just want to go hide somewhere.
Understood.
Yeah, but very nice to be able to talk to you all and meet some new cruisers. And I very much want to get you all on the air, so to speak. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. And I'll make sure that the recording gets put up on the website so you can, get more info. If anybody needs the slides, let me know. We can get those to you too. Thank you all.